Man's thumb played aimlessly around his pint, wiping at the condensation on the glass. Those that strolled into the crowded Ten Bells pub barely noticed him. From the outside, he appeared to be just another patron, looking to enjoy a drink before setting back out into the drizzling fog of the London evening. Alan was his name, a normal, unassuming name. Yet, if someone could have opened up Alan's skull and viewed his thoughts, their stomach would have churned at the horror they saw in this normal and unassuming monster. Alan glanced around the pub, trying to keep his breathing even. Other patrons milled about, drinking and chatting. He could see happiness in their faces, an emotion foreign to him that he regarded with detached curiosity. He shook his head and chided himself to focus. Tonight was a special night. Tonight, he would follow in the footsteps of his greatest hero. But first, he needed a partner for his evening plans. This place, he thought as he looked around, was the best spot to find that perfect person. Then, from the corner of his sight, he saw her. He blinked, his brain taking a second to fully comprehend what he was seeing. The woman herself was nothing special, save for the out-of-place clothing she wore. It was her sudden appearance that startled him, for he was sure she hadn't been sitting at that small table in the corner of the pub just a few seconds earlier. Alan tried not to stare, instead giving the woman quick glances here and there. He was good at not being noticed when he didn't want to be. She had a round, pale face with hard eyes that gave her the look of someone much older than the man guessed she was. He took in her clothing and almost couldn't hold back a grin. The woman wore a high-collared dress that looked more at home in Victorian London than amongst the modern business people, hipsters, and tourists who milled around the Ten Bells. Perhaps a busker from Covent Garden, he mused, imagining the woman stuffing that dress in the tube. Regardless, she was more perfect than he could have hoped for. For almost an hour, Palin sat and inconspicuously watched the woman. She barely moved in her chair, only occasionally glancing around the room. She never spoke, and none of the other pub-goers paid her any mind. Glancing down at his watch, Alan saw that it was nearing 10 o'clock, and he felt his impatience gnaw at the inside of his stomach. The squirming darkness within him wanted to act. It wanted violence, and it was losing patience. It took real effort for Alan to keep himself in his chair. Looking back to where the woman sat, he jolted to see the table empty. His eyes swooped over the pub, his neck craning to see past the knots of people in a vain effort to catch sight of the woman. She wasn't there. Alan shot to his feet, nearly knocking over his table, but not caring if anyone noticed. His eyes gave the inside of the Ten Bells one last look before he turned and hurried outside. On the sidewalk of Commercial Street, he whipped his gaze back and forth. People milled around him, some huddled against the rainy and cold September night, some taking selfies next to Christchurch Spitalfields just across the street. He hardly noticed any of this. There was only one person that he saw it. He teetered on the edge of despair at his lost quarry. But then, he saw her. The woman from the pub in the old-fashioned clothing was walking slowly down the sidewalk, past the church and shops. His heart pounding in his ears, Alan hurried after her. Not so fast as to attract attention, but fast enough to keep her in his sights. She turned and walked down an alleyway, momentarily disappearing from view. The dark thing that had squirmed in his guts was now boiling with anticipation. He almost skipped as he rounded the corner, but stopped cold. The alleyway seemed empty. It was a narrow space with a one-way street bordered by sidewalks. The end of the alley was barely visible in the fog, and all he could see was a metal gate that would have blocked the woman's path. Impossibly, she was gone again. He moved cautiously down the alley. With surprising swiftness, the hustle and bustle of the busy street behind him melted away. In what felt like mere seconds, a creeping feeling of isolation nipped at the inside of his skull. He found that he was cold, as all the heat in his blood from his previous excitement stilled, and leached away. The alley was dimly lit by one streetlight. The most of what the light illuminated was the fog. The windows of buildings on either side of the alley were dark and lifeless. The gentle scuffing of his shoes on the street was the only sign of life that he could sense. All at once, he saw her. The woman was there, standing deathly still at the end of the alley. Alan froze and his heart nearly stopped. She stared at him, those hard eyes gripping him and holding him fast. Her expression wasn't of anger or fear. It was something else that he couldn't quite identify. He knew he had to make a decision, advance or run. Gritting his teeth so hard that they squeaked inside his head, he mentally ordered his legs to turn around and walk away. But a cold jolt of fear shot through him as he realized he couldn't move. Heat rose in his blood once more, but this time from a ragged panic, as the woman stared at him, and, helpless, he stared back. All efforts to control his fear shattered as Alan caught sight of the other figure in the alleyway. This other figure strode toward him with swift, menacing steps. It was a man, a large man. Alan could do nothing but watch and struggle to breathe as the figure approached. The large man came to a halt only a few feet from him. Despite the close proximity, Alan couldn't quite make out his face. It was as if there were tears in his eyes that blurred his vision, but only around the man's features. But he could smell him. And Alan's nose twisted, had an overwhelming odor that brought to mind damp earth, rotting leaves, and stilled blood. Alan tried to speak, but his voice was barely a stammering whisper as his throat closed, as if allergic to the mere presence of the man before him.
"I know who you are,"
the large figure growled.
"Not who you appear to be, but who you really are. I see the rot in your soul and the violence in your mind. I see you. You wish to follow me, to hunt my streets, to feel the blood stick to your fingers and to listen to the whisper of a last breath. Yes, I know you."
Icy terror squeezed Alan's lungs like a man drowning in the depths of a winter-kissed river. His wide eyes stared at the figure before him, quivering and unblinking.
"The path you walk leads to your damnation, as it did to mine. You might think you know what hell is, but you know nothing. Imagine your last moments as you see the face of the monster you truly are, the knowledge of the most horrific penance that awaits you, infinitely multiplied, suffocating you every moment of an eternal night."
He looked back at the woman standing behind him. She didn't move, just silently stared at them.
"It crawls through your veins and behind your eyes. You can taste it in your throat, and it rings in your ears. If you caught only a glimpse of what awaits you, your living mind would collapse, and you would scream until your throat shattered."
Sweat rolled down Alan's back as his body began to shake.
"This is one step on my nearly endless path of my penance. You are one tiny cog in the nearly infinite machinery of my salvation. You must think I'm here to stop you, perhaps to offer you a chance to save yourself the torment that waits to greet you at the moment of your death. I'm here to save all those you would harm from this day forward if left to your own devices. That is my penance, to stop people like you, people like me."
Alan's body now quaked uncontrollably as tears dropped to the cold, wet cobblestones at his feet. The man grabbed Alan's throat and jerked him close to his face. The menacing man grinned, his eyes dark and cold.
"I should kill you, but I am not that merciful."
It wasn't until the next morning that a passerby found the gibbering mess of a man huddled at the end of the alley near the 10 Bells pub. Medical personnel were called, asking the man his name and trying to calm him down. Despite their best efforts, the only sounds that Alan made for the remainder of his broken life was screaming.
On a corner of busy commercial street in London stands the 10 Bells pub. London is full of pubs, many that date back centuries with rich histories. There aren't many, though, with ties to one of the darkest times in English history, like the 10 Bells. The infamous serial killer Jack the Ripper stalked London's gritty streets in the late 1800s. He was responsible for a series of gruesome murders, and his identity remains a mystery to this day. So, how does the 10 Bells fit in? Built in the late 1700s and named for the bells of the church located just across the street, the 10 Bells is thought to have been frequented by two of Jack's victims, Annie Chapman and Mary Jane Kelly. Some believe that Annie continues to haunt the 10 Bells today. Annie Chapman lived a hard life during her 47 years. She suffered from tuberculosis and, it is believed, syphilis as well. She also had a drinking problem, and her marriage to John Chapman fell apart due to her, quote, drunken and immoral ways. She and John had 3 children, though one son was a cripple and sent to live in an invalid home, while another daughter passed away of meningitis at 12 years old. In the early morning hours of Annie's last day on Earth, she is surviving the best she could. Around 5:30 a.m. on the morning of September 8, 1888, Annie is seen with a shadowy man near Spitalfields Market. A few moments later, a witness hears a woman's voice cry out, and something heavy falls against a fence. Annie's body is found just before 6 a.m., her throat slashed. Mary Kelly met her end at a much younger age than Annie, only 25 years old. She was born in Ireland from a family that was described as fairly well off. Mary herself was said to have been an excellent scholar and an artist of no mean degree. Despite this, after her husband was killed in an explosion, Mary became a lady of the night and arrived in London in 1884. On the evening of November 8th and early morning of November 9th, 1888, Mary is seen with a respectably dressed man with a mustache. Around 10:45 a.m., a man named Thomas Bower knocked on the door where Mary was staying. Getting no response, Thomas parts the curtains and peers in the window. What he sees is horrific. Mary lays on her bed, her body ripped and torn, though her clothes were folded neatly on a nearby chair. Mary was known to hang around the 10 Bells, seeking clients for the evening. Mary doesn't seem to linger at the 10 Bells, but more than 135 years later, patrons of the pub say that Annie does. She's seen sitting at a table and enjoying a final pint, though the apparition is also blamed for breaking an occasional glass and even stealing from 10 Bells guests. In addition to Annie, an old man is also said to haunt the 10 Bells. Believed to perhaps be a former landlord, the old man stalks the upper floors of the pub. Footsteps are heard in empty hallways and rooms, and staff report seeing the shadowy figure of a man move in the corners of their vision. When they look more closely, they find themselves alone. Most disturbing, when staff lived above the pub, some were terrified to feel presence climb into bed with them in the middle of the night. When they turn to look, an old man with Victorian-era clothing and horrible blackened teeth is next to them, grinning creepily. Who exactly this old man is a mystery. The one story tells of a landlord who was murdered, his killer never caught. It's possible the ghost of the old man is seeking justice, though perhaps he simply feels his life was taken before his time. If you visit London and find yourself at the 10 Bells pub, take a closer look at the people through the windows. Do any appear out of place? Perhaps a pale lady in an old-fashioned dress? Look more closely. You just may have met one of Jack the Ripper's unfortunate victims.